Oh, I guess we'll get started right now. It is the top of the hour. So greetings, everyone. Welcome to MAXDAYS 2023. In this session, we are going to look at some of the tools and procedures you can use to organize your research data. So my name is Joel Drevlo. I am a MAXQDA cooperation partner and certified trainer. I'm based out of Boston, Massachusetts, USA. Go Red Sox. So to start off today, just a little bit of a sort of vignette to guide us in. When I was in high school, I worked in a tiny little hardware store off 3rd Street near the downtown of where I was living. We crammed an unbelievable amount of inventory into that tiny little place, which meant that we usually had that little nut, bolt, or screw that you were after, but it also meant that a display of goods could get really, really messy. So if the layout didn't make sense, on quiet nights, I used to spend whole shifts just organizing displays to make the layout clean and ordered, making sure things were arranged according to size, type, brand, whatever category that you could think of. Once you had done this a time or two, the sorting became easier. You sort of developed some implicit criteria to make the whole process work. And more importantly, when someone came in looking for something, you knew exactly where to direct them because you had organized the whole section. So what does organized inventory at a hardware store have to do with MAXQDA? Well, it's a way to get us sort of thinking about our own process, how organization makes it easier to find what we're after. Today, we're going to make explicit some of those ways that you can get and stay organized when you're working with MAXQDA. So it's not exactly hanging stuff on a pegboard, but it is a little bit of that sentiment. So let's talk about some of the ways that you can organize your research data. So a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind as we go through this topic today. First, these are raw tools. You can use these to get started with this process, but you will need to put in sort of the time and experiment to find what works best for you and your project. So plan time for trial and error as you import and organize. Do set aside some time. When we do this kind of work, it's so much fun to get to the coding and the actual analysis that we maybe skip over some of this stuff. Fight that urge and put some time into this organizational process. Again, depending on the data that you're working with, the size of your team, or if you even have a team, things will likely look a little bit different for you. So this isn't probably going to be a one-to-one comparison. The idea is that you dedicate some time to this process. So it really is an investment, and it will pay off in the later stages of your project when you start to generate reports, when you start to do summaries, create visualizations, retrieve stuff. All of this gets easier if you have these organizational pieces built in. Second, it may be helpful to think of some of these features as a routine, a step in a routine, rather than a tool that you use. It really is the repeated use of these features. So as your project file expands, if you are building it over time, maybe you do some interviews, do some analysis, go out and do some more, or you collect some more survey data. So you'll need to be adding this sort of systematically, step by step as you go. And finally, like I noted earlier, the procedures, the techniques, these are only a single way. This is a single approach. Again, your team, your data, your methodological approach. You might have to adapt some of this a little or even a lot to make it work. For example, if you're collecting thousands of survey responses, you're probably not going to use many document memos. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to include just because there's so many. So we'll discuss some of that stuff as we get going today. All right, so our session goals, what are we going to talk about? First of all, we're going to go through some of the different import procedures. There's a lot of different ways to get data into MAXQDA, so we'll talk about some of the specific ways that you can do that, some of the basic ways, and some of the more specialized ways depending on the data that you're working with. We're also going to look at some of the specific techniques you can use to organize specifically your document system. I'm hoping we'll have some time at the end of the session, we can look at the code system as well, because some of the same tools that we use there, you can apply in your code system as well. So the specific pieces we'll look at are memos. Where can you use memos to stay organized, to sort of capture some of that metadata in your project? We'll look at document colors. So how can you color code things either for organizational purposes or actually for sort of analytical purposes, if you actually establish a criteria for what colors mean. We'll talk about custom document sets as well, which can be a great way to do some exploratory analysis as you get started with your project. All right, so that's it for my slides. The rest of this is going to be just an actual demonstration in MAXQDA, so you can follow along with this. I'll be working from the example project, the English Work-Life Balance example project. So if you do want to follow along and highlight some of these things on your computer as we're going, you can open that project up and follow along. All right, so let's start out with import. Anytime you open a new project in MAXQDA, it's going to default you to this import tab, because the first thing that you have to do is import data. You can't really do much work if you don't have data in your project file. So we're going to talk about some of the different ways that you can import, some of the basic ways. We'll talk about some of the specialized examples as well. So in a lot of things, you can actually drag and drop things directly into MAXQDA. If you're doing basic data, for example, if you're working with text files, Word documents, if you're working with PDFs or images, even things like that, you can basically drag and drop those into your document system. So if you have a folder that's already sorted, on your desktop or in your file manager, you can actually just bring that in right away, and it will maintain those organizational elements. So if you have things sorted into folders and subfolders, it will maintain that integrity as you drop it into MAXQDA. So again, that includes things like text, PDFs, and images. When you start to get to more specialized forms of data, like transcripts, transcripts here, focus group transcripts, images, audio, things like that, you can drop in as well. But survey data, particular types of data like Twitter, YouTube, web pages, those things you'll want to actually use those specific wizards because it's going to set that data up in a proper format so that you can work with it more easily in MAXQDA. There's some specific considerations. We don't really have time to go into all of that stuff today. There's probably some more specialized sessions on maybe working with survey data. I'm doing one in about an hour now from now about focus groups that will talk about some specific considerations there. But basically, it's the way that your data is shaped, the specific characteristics of it, tabular data and things like that just looks different as it gets imported, and you use it differently in the software. So again, the drag and drop option is pretty easy. When you're doing specialized import, you'll note, like, for example, with transcripts, we do have a few options that are available to us, transcripts with timestamps and without timestamps. So MAXQDA has the capability to link an audio or video file to your transcript. So if you have that, that file handy, you can import it along with your transcripts, and it will actually tie it to that. So if we take a look here at one of those, for example, in Mateo's interview, you'll see these little clock icons. I don't have the media file linked here on my computer, but it would essentially take you to this particular section. You can see 3 minutes, 11 seconds to 3 minutes, 22 seconds. So, if you wanted to combine an analysis of the actual video clip or the audio clip along with the text, you could do that. If that was an aspect of your approach that you're taking to your analysis, if you want to see facial expressions, if you want to look for micro pauses, if you want to look for any of that specific criteria, you could include that as an aspect of your analysis. One thing to note, that if you do coding on both pieces, let's say I code on my transcript and I code on my video, those do exist in separate places. They're not connected essentially. So the codes essentially that you assign to a video would not appear here in your text transcript. They are sort of unique pieces. So that can be kind of a nice piece in terms of when you import those. There is also the option, if you are working with transcription software, we do have some API with some specific versions here. I get asked a lot, what's the best option for transcription software? They're all pretty good, really. The one consideration I would make is if you're working with a specific language, that's something that you'll want to check out. Some of these softwares work great with English. A few of them, obviously MAXQDA, a German company, we have a few that are particularly good with German audio. So you do want to pay attention to that if you are working with a particular language in your project. You'll also see the options here for focus groups. These are very similar in terms of the options that you have with and without timestamps, so you can link an audio or video recording of your actual focus group. When we get to things with survey data, most frequently you'll be using this Excel spreadsheet option. If you're using a service like Qualtrics, that's usually what you'll use. I know that's a pretty big one. SurveyMonkey does have a specific API, so you can actually link this to your sort of library, your survey library. In terms of the output, it's exactly the same. The nice thing is just that it saves you some clicks, right? I don't have to export a file and clean it up. It's already I can pull it directly in from the database. So it can be a little bit of a smoother operation if you do have a SurveyMonkey account. Twitter and YouTube are very similar. For Twitter, do note that you will need a Twitter account. So it again uses API, and so you can use your Twitter account to search for specific things that you're interested in. Do note down here that it only allows you tweets older than 1 week. So you do need to keep that in mind. You don't get access to the entire sort of library of tweets. I'm not sure exactly. I know that there's some changes going on at Twitter. I think we're all probably pretty aware of that. There is some changes with how API is functioning. I'm not sure what that's going to look like going forward. I don't know, Mara, if you have more insight on that than I do, you can maybe drop that in the chat if you do. But that's something to be aware of. In addition to that, there is opportunities as well if you're doing literature review to pull in things from specific reference manager software, so you can pull those files in. When you do this, it will pull in reference data as variables. So things like authors, is it a journal or a book? You can pull in additionally like year of publication and stuff like that. So you get some of that metadata that comes along, and you can actually pull in those PDFs as well if you want to do the analysis in MAXQDA. So that can be a really handy feature for you. One last thing that I wanted to show, this is a new feature with the most current release, is the automatic import option. So if you come to your settings options, the little gear up in the right, there's an option here for automatic import. You can specify a folder, your documents, your desktop, wherever it is, and you can actually drop, anytime you drop data into that folder, it will automatically import every time you open MAXQDA. You can kind of think of it like a working directory. If you've ever worked with like R and done an R project where you set a directory and everything lives in there, it's kind of a similar concept to that. That can be kind of a nice piece. Again, if you're working on, you're building a project file over time, maybe adding interviews, or you're doing a follow-up round of surveys, or you're adding to your literature review, this can be kind of a nice place to store data. It just saves you a little bit of time in terms of, if you're specifying a specific download folder when you're downloading documents or something like that, it can be helpful. So that's something to check out as well. So that takes you through basic options for import. Again, pretty straightforward. You'll just want to make sure that you're using the proper import sort of tool or wizard with the specific data type that you're working with. So let's move on to the actual data system organization piece. And again, I'm working this example project file. And if I take a look at this, you'll notice that I have in MAXQDA, what we call them would be document groups. You can think of them as folders. It really functions just like any file explorer does on a Mac or Windows. And essentially what this is just a way to keep things organized. So you have folders and subfolders, and you can arrange this in a lot of different ways. And just to sort of give you some examples of how you might do that, in this particular project, this is an example. So when people want to see what types of data can you work with in MAXQDA, we have it situated to show you that, right? So it's functional in terms of what we want to display to you. If you were doing a project that was a pre-post analysis, you could easily have a folder for pre and a folder for post. And so when you would conduct your analysis, it would be easy to do a breakdown then, comparing the sort of how your codes distribute among those two different groups. And to give you a quick example of this, let me just show you. So I've got in my interviews folder, I have folders for Berlin and folders for Hamburg. And, I could base this on saying, maybe there's a comparison I'm making between the socioeconomic status of the two cities. There's some kind of comparison that I'm using to see how my codes differ. So if I go to my visual tools and I do a code matrix browser, what this is going to show me is basically a split. I'll have 2 columns for each folder, and then all my rows will be any codes that I designate. So I'm going to specify document groups, and I'm going to specify second level. You see this is indented, second level. I'm going to activate, let's do work-life balance. I'll specify just my activated codes. And I'll activate these documents as well, only activated documents. You'll see these options in a lot of places in MAXQDA, and they're nice just to make sure that you segment whatever it is you're trying to look at. And if I create this, I get a nice table that shows the breakdown of my codes. I can see, the friends and family code was assigned more often in Berlin than Hamburg. You'll see I have 5 documents and 22 segments here. And what do I have over here? My tooltip's not working. Let's just change the numbers. I have 16. So that's not terribly interesting in terms of a distribution, but you get the picture that it's a way to draw a quick comparison. So this goes back to that previous point of putting in a little bit of time to figuring out how you want to organize your document system. It's going to allow you to make these visualizations a lot faster, to make more of them, right? If you want to see sort of more of these comparisons. And it's just sort of, at least from my perspective, it's just a way to sort of keep things clear for me, sort of what documents are where and what the purpose of things are. So take some time to think about that as you're organizing your project. What do you want to show ultimately? Sort of what's the deliverable, or what's the product you're trying to generate? What kind of commentary you're trying to provide? And organize your document system to sort of match that intended outcome. And that will really speed up the process in terms of providing these types of visualizations or other things. So I'll reset those. So we talked about organizing your document group. So one example I gave you was pre-post. You could also use, just to give you some more examples, geography, which we saw in the interviews. We have Berlin and Hamburg. You could do time if you had interviews at a certain period of time. Obviously, that's similar to pre-post. You could also use this if you are going to be working in a team and you're going to be checking for intercoder agreement. You'll need to have document groups as well. So coder 1, coder 2 in separate document groups, and that's how you would have duplicate documents in there, and that's how you would be able to compare those things. So it's just one situation where the organization really does facilitate more sort of use of the program later on. So we talked about document groups, we talked about document subgroups. Let's talk a little bit about document sets. You can see a couple of those present here. Document sets are a really great place to sort of stage your analysis. So if you're working with a very expansive project file, if I activate all my documents, I have 80 documents in here, so that's not crazy. I mean, if you're working with lots of survey data, or if you're working with broad analysis of, newspaper clippings or something like that, you can easily have tens of thousands of documents. So any opportunities you get to segment your data where you're looking at a portion of that rather than the entire thing is going to be helpful. So one of the ways that you can do that is with document sets. And what's nice about document sets is that they can be very experimental. So document groups up here in these actual folders, these are permanent, right? Your data lives here, like all these images live here. This is their home. Document sets are sort of placeholders. You can create as many of these as you want and I delete them later, right? I can experiment with certain groupings based off of variable values or types of data. And if I decide this isn't relevant, I don't need this anymore, or I've already done the analysis and I'm on to stage 2, I can delete them out of my document system and they're no longer there. So again, keeping things clean, right? Trying to keep extraneous information out of your view space. So removing those document sets can be a nice piece if you're no longer using them. So let's take a look at how you would create them. One of the easiest ways would be to just activate particular documents. I could activate these 4 interviews. I can right click in my sets option and I can create a new set from my activated document. So in the course of my analysis, if I find some things that are relevant, if I just stumble upon them, I don't have any specific criteria to know that I want them, but I found them, I can activate them and I can save them as a document set. There are also other ways to do this, probably more useful ways to do this. The most useful way being with variables. So in my document system, I can activate by variables. This will open up a table that shows all of the variable criteria that I have available to me in my project file. Do note that the red dots here are created by MAXQDA, so that's kind of like metadata, I guess, computer generated. The blue ones are user created. So these are the ones that I have either generated or were imported along with some survey data, or I added via a spreadsheet. There's lots of ways that you can get variables in. And so I can grab a specific criteria. If I know as I'm conducting my analysis, maybe because of a particular interest or a directive from an advisor or a supervisor that they want to see some kind of analysis based on level of education. So I could specify this variable. I could grab a specific type. So let's say I want to start with individuals that have a bachelor's degree. That's relevant to me for a particular reason, my analysis. I can either just activate these, so I can grab those documents right away, or I can create a new set. So let's go ahead and create this new set. And so what happens here now is I have this variable value that's specified here, highest level of education equals bachelor's degree. Now I can rename this if I want to. I can click into here and delete any of this text and provide any name that I want to. That's another useful organizational feature if you are working in teams. Let's say you're a project manager and you've made the project file, you've created sort of the research questions and the assignments. Now you're designating it to, students or analysts that you're working with. You can specify their particular name here. So I could do in here, analysis for Jim. That way, when Jim opens his project file, he knows exactly what data is expected of him. He's not confused. He doesn't know which one. He's not confused about which data to work with. It's all right there in the set. So in terms of project management, that's a really nice feature to have included. So again, to do that, just to refresh on that process, using the activate by, we're going to use variables here. We'll specify some kind of variable criteria. Note that you can stack these. So I could look at, employment status and age, 18. So I can layer these variables, and you can see here I have 3 documents. So obviously the more variables you layer, the less documents you're going to get, but that might be your purpose. So you can use some pretty interesting logic here. You can also specify these things, if you have Likert data and survey questions, or if you've done coding work that's like degree of satisfaction or something like that on a scale, you can use that logic here as well to grab particular documents that may be of interest to you. So this is a very versatile feature in terms of grabbing pieces of information. And you can use it at the beginning to grab data that you want to start with to do your analysis, or you can do analysis on the whole thing and maybe your cursory analysis, and then you grab documents that may be of interest and you follow through in an iterative fashion to follow up on specific documents that might be most relevant or places that you want to start. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use this. That's why I'm saying plan some time. There's a lot of ways that you can experiment with how you can organize this in your project. All right, so we've gone through documents, document groups, subgroups, document sets. Let's talk a little bit about document colors. If I open my interviews, you'll see that these are all golden. If I right click into this interview, I can change the color here. I can specify anything. I can also set some really custom colors if I want to as well. Colors you can use a lot of different ways. I've used them in the past in an organizational fashion. So we were working in a data set where I had to actually clean data in MAXQDA before assigning it to students to analyze. And so I would designate when something was ready to be analyzed with color. Red means stop, green means go. And so that was helpful because students could come up, they could activate by color, they could select, the the green documents, and they could get everything that was ready to go in their project file. Now that's tricky because if you miss one along the way, you can cause some problems. So do make sure if you want to use colors that you're very consistent with it. You can also include sort of an aspect of analysis in there. Red may signify some type of sort of code or theme or something like that. So you can almost roll a code into your document system. It's just another way to layer sort of the filtering and selection capabilities that you have in MAXQDA. Let's talk a little bit about memos. I think memos are pretty straightforward, but there's a few particular uses that I would like to highlight. In your document system, you have memos in a couple places. Top level of memo is called your project memo. This is a great place to keep overall project notes. So, what's the scope of your data? If you are building a project out over time, let's say you're consistently adding data, tracking, okay, on March 22nd, I imported these documents and I've analyzed these documents. If you're working with extensive data sets, that can be really, really helpful, especially if you're collaborating in teams. Additionally, you can include analysis questions, research questions, team assignments, due dates for teams if they have questions with those. What's nice about this is the project memo is front and center at the top of your document system, so everybody sees it's there. A lot of folks will use the logbook as well to track this kind of stuff. To each their own. You can use either one. I like this just because it's more apparent. Document groups, if you take a look at these, for example, in the interviews, we have present metadata. So this is the interview questions that were asked. If you are assigning this work to someone else and they didn't do the interviews, that's going to be really helpful information to have the actual questions that were asked. So that can be a really helpful piece. Typically, document group memos include metadata. So it's information about the data inside the folder. If you go down a level, or in this case, 2 levels, and you look at a specific document memo, you'll note that we have a little bit extra here. We have a document summary. So what's nice about this, if you're working with long form data, less documents, less but longer documents, this document summary can be a nice piece. Once you've gone through and done your paraphrasing and your analysis and your commenting, you can come back and you can write these document summaries that give you a nice quick synopsis of what you saw. Memos are limitless in terms of the amount of text. So if you want to write your thesis in there, you can go ahead and do that. There's no limit to the amount of text that you can put in there. So, it can be a pretty helpful place to contain these kinds of notes if something pops up. There's a lot of other features. You can put memos almost anywhere in a MAXQDA project, but in terms of organization, these are probably the pretty important ones. To pop down to the code system for just a second, of course, those memos are present here, and I would argue that these are probably the most important memos in MAXQDA. If you don't have a clearly defined code system, there's not a whole lot of meaning. It needs to be defined in sort of how you are interpreting the meaning of those codes, how you're applying them. So this is a great place. Note that you also have the code summary here as well to include, once you've done enough coding, where you can kind of get a sense of how you've applied this and what its application is and means, you can include that in these codes as well. There are the opportunities as well in your code system to do sets. So if I create a new set, so I'll just retitle this. We'll rename this. No, let me. We'll just leave the name for now. You can rename these, but it's just being very finicky about clicking in here. What I can do is I can actually grab codes and I can drag them in here and I can drop them into my set. So I've got education, I've got childcare, I've got home office. So what this allows me to do, instead of, if I've got many, many codes and they're spread all over my code system but there are aspects, maybe subcodes underneath my parent codes that are relevant, right, to another code that's sort of based in a different way. You can kind of think of this if you're taking kind of like a network approach where you've got codes all over the place. Maybe they're arranged hierarchically, but they're all over the place, and you combine those codes to bring together some sort of analysis on a particular topic, you can include those in a set as well. So now instead of having to find all these different codes, I can keep them in a set, and I can activate those, and you'll see they activate here across these different parent codes, right? I have my home office, I have my education and childcare. So if you are, on a particular stage of your analysis where you're analyzing a particular theme or a particular idea that grabs a lot of these different codes, you can include that. One last thing that I'll show you here that I think is particularly cool. In the visual tools, if I create a code map, let me reset these. And let's just do it for the interviews and the work situation. If I create a code map here, only activated documents, I'm setting the intersection, I'm setting the relation very close, very tight. So intersection meaning they happen in the same piece of text. Like this would be, these two codes would intersect because they're on the same paragraph. So if I set this up here, I get a map, and I can actually save this as a variable. I can save this cluster as a variable. So I've got all my sort of different clustering of these codes and sort of where they coexist in these particular documents that I've set. When I come up here to create a new set, I can actually use those particular variable values to, just like I did up here to create a set where I activated by variable values, I can include that here and create a set based off of those clusters. So that can be kind of a nice piece to include as you start to look at some of the relationships between your codes, if you're starting to narrow in on some of those things. Let's see, was there any last thing I wanted to talk about in this? Code memos, code sets. Hierarchy, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, we have parent codes and child codes. This is a very, very common way to organize your code system sort of in a hierarchical fashion. In terms of like a workflow, it's nice because you can start with a broad coding of a top level theme. You can sort of loop over that and break that out into smaller sub themes. Again, it's putting yourself in a situation where instead of working with a whole bunch of data, you're working with a manageable portion of data. So organizing your code system in that hierarchical fashion, I think, is very common. It's kind of the default, I think, for most people that I've seen in consulting with folks on how they build code systems. But I am right at 32 minutes. And I know we want to save some time to answer questions at the end here. So I'm going to do that. Let me go ahead and pull over the questions here. Is there a Q&A? So I am in the Q&A. If you posted your question in the chat, I'm over in the actual Q&A folder. Let's see. I'll start with the first one's asked. Oh, that one's been answered. If I import an audio video with a transcript, is there a way to see the raw transcript with all the timestamp codes? For example, I've used the number timestamp format on my custom transcript and imported it, but I wanted to see the original raw file I uploaded, especially since I had a couple of line breaks mistakes. If you upload it as a transcript, those timestamps are going to be converted to these clock icons here. So you won't have the number timestamp present in the transcript itself, but it will be present here in the clock icon. If you wanted a hack to include it, you could probably like put some parentheses or brackets around it, and then MAXQDA would probably ignore it. I'm not 100% on that. I've never tried to do that myself, but you could experiment with that to see if that would work if you wanted to keep that in. Line break mistakes. Yeah, do note that MAXQDA does function as a text editor too. So if you need to make revisions in your document, you can do that. It does not change the original. That will remain the same. No changes will happen there. In the workflow you discussed where you prepared documents for students, how did the multiple collaborators work on the file? So we had, and if you want to read about this, I actually wrote co-wrote a chapter in the Practice of Qualitative Data Analysis, MAXQDA Press, where we go into detail. Essentially, we had We started doing group analysis, so pairs. We had students coding in dyads. We just like that format, but you can do it individually as well. Everybody gets a file, so there's several duplicate files. This is why creating a document set is so important, because when I create a folder, analysis for Jim, it's just his information. It's just his documents. And then I have analysis for Jill, and it's just her documents. When I go to do my merge, or actually my exchange file, so I create an export file, and to merge all those back into a new file, I only have their work in each of the respective files. There's no overlap, there's no conflicts. So again, organization, planning, making sure that they're only working on their data, she's only working on her data, I'm only working on my data, and you avoid those conflicts like that. Next question, is it possible to import an Excel spreadsheet as is so that our economists can search for their statistical data in the spreadsheet? Yeah, you can actually, well, there's a couple of ways you could do that. You can import that. So usually the way, when you import a spreadsheet, you can import it as a table. You can import table, basically you just drag them right into MAXQDA to create a table document. It's not very user-friendly to work with it that way, and you lose out on a lot of what you can do with MAXQDA. You need to think about units of analysis. So in a table format, usually a row is a document, and each column is an aspect of the document, whether it's a variable or a piece of coded text. So if you pull in survey data, for example, each row in your survey is going to be a single document. And what that allows you to do is to create those kinds of visualizations and accurate code counts and things like that in MAXQDA. If you did it in table format, it's difficult to work with. In your case, it sounds like you probably want to check out the stats module. I'm not sure who's doing presentations on that this year. I know Stefan usually does some stuff with that. I don't know if anybody else is doing that this year. I would look into the stats module in terms of opening stuff. You can open external files. You can open them directly from Excel, and then you can do some of that analysis here. So that's something I would check out. Can documents be linked? For example, 2 interviews at different points in time with the same participant. Yes, absolutely they can. So I can highlight, let's highlight this paragraph. I right click, I can insert a link here, and then let's go over to Salim's interview. I'll highlight this text, and I can, let's see, internal link target here. So now this is hyperlinked. So I have the I have the 2 documents that are linked together. So I have, if I click on that hyperlink, I get back and forth. So I can do that there. You can put those links all over the place. You can put them in memos. For example, if you created a free memo, say I had a thought about my project, don't know where to attach it yet, and I find later it should go here, I can hyperlink to that particular piece of text, and it's included then in my document. So there's a lot of different ways that you can hyperlink. That's a really great question. Thanks for asking that. Might you be able to go over code maps again? I didn't quite understand their utility. Yes, I can take a quick look at that. There is other sessions that are more focused on visual tools that probably do a better job than this, but I'll do one quickly. So in MAXQDA, as far as visualizations go, there's a few considerations. So typically you're looking at distribution of codes in a document. That would be sort of your code matrix browser, where you're looking at how many codes exist in a certain document, and sort of, or do they exist in a certain document. Code relations browser and code map are very similar. That's looking where do codes intersect. So where codes applied in the same piece of text or in the same document. So I can adjust my parameters here in the same document, and proximity meaning a paragraph or 2 paragraphs apart. Occurrence in the same document meaning they happen just in the entire interview. So if you have like a 20-page interview, that's a lot of data. And so what this does, you can represent that in the code relations browser in a table, in a matrix, where you have your codes as rows, or as columns and as rows, and then you count the number. What a code map does is it represents that spatially. So essentially the distance of the dots is indicative of how frequently they're used together. The size of the dot reflects how many times it was applied. And then these numbers are how frequently they occur together. And so it's just another way to sort of visualize this. And you can customize all these things in here. You can turn certain things on and off. You can customize the map of this. You can pull this over into an actual max map too, if you want to incorporate this as a layer in a map. So that's just kind of a basic overview of this. In terms of the clustering, saving that as a variable, that allows you to just grab some of these comparisons, right? Maybe you weren't sure how frequently codes interacted. So by creating this visualization and then saving it as a variable, it allows you to get a sense of sort of how similar they are, where they're interacting and things like that, rather than just having to know implicitly from having done all the coding, right? Hopefully that helps in terms of an explanation. Is it possible for an automatic audio extraction from an interview, YouTube, etc., and convert it to a text document? No, unfortunately not. MAXQDA does not have auto transcription service. If you have a video, so let's open this up. I can right click this, and this would allow me to, of course, that one's not in here. I don't have any audio files, but essentially you right click this option, you transcribe the video file, and what this allows you to do, let's see if I can, that's not open either. I just cleaned out my project files this morning, so I must have removed the linked data. What it opens up is a interface where you can type. So you can type it in. You'll have your audio present, your text editor present, and an area where you can specify speaker change. So you can do it for a single speaker, multiple speakers. Some people like that. It's a lot of work. I mean, transcriptions, I did it in grad school. It sucks, but it works. And the nice part is you can code along with it. So you can essentially do that first round of work while you are transcribing. Some people really like to work that way. But no, there is not auto transcription service. Again, we do have API with certain groups, so you can use one of these. You know, this one's pretty popular these days, Teams and Zoom. If you have a premium account, you can get transcription if you do virtual interviews. And so you would have to use one of those services. YouTube, essentially when you get YouTube data, what you will get is sort of, that will give you transcripts from the actual video, but it will also give you comments, and you can specify sort of what you want to pull in. That's a good question. Does it make sense to code interview questions too, or do participants' responses just need to be coded? I guess it would depend. I mean, it would depend on the particular sort of approach that you're taking with your analysis, if you want to include that with it. In terms of, you know, if you're going to be doing subsequent rounds of interviews, it could obviously be helpful to have some analysis on the questions that you asked, if you want to be sort of taking some sort of reflexive notes about things that you could maybe change sort of in subsequent rounds of interviews. But I don't have a specific, you know, this method says do it, this method says don't. It would just, you would have to see if it was relevant to sort of your research questions. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you on that one. Looks like I got all of them in the Q&A. I'll go back to the chat, see if there's anything in there I missed. Let's see. I'll just start at the bottom. Sorry, there's a lot of questions here. Can we classify codes using colors to refer to specific themes? Yes, you can. Every code, when you create it, so if I right click here, I open up this code, you'll see it has a color. This one is turquoise, I think. You can activate codes by color. So if I wanted to, I could choose particular colors. So red could signify a certain theme or something like that. That does work, but again, you need to make sure that you keep that straight. And that can be kind of a tricky thing. For that reason, it might be better to create a code set for you. Do you recommend a guidebook that can help in organizing MAXQDA data? There's some great tools on MAXQDA Press. So if you go to maxqda.com and you go to MAXQDA Press, there's some excellent resources there, and they're free. You know, the official one that I think is written by Udo Kukarts and I'm trying to see if I have it on my bookshelf over here, and written by Udo Kukarts and Stefan Radiker is a great book as well. That one is not free. I think that one's through Springer. That's a good book as well. I've read that one in terms of getting started. Let's see, is there a basic electronic book? Okay, that one we talked about. You import a document list from Excel. You could import a list, but in terms of storing your documents in there, I guess you could do that. It would be kind of tricky in terms of how things got organized. Again, you'd have to pay. If you would check out on the website in the manual, check out the chapter on survey data. It'll talk about what a table needs to look like to be imported properly in MAXQDA. If you follow that format, you could import your data in a table format. It would work just fine. All right, so we are up at it here. It's 11:45. So I guess we'll stop the session here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. It was great questions here in the chat. I hope that you take something away from this session. My contact information is in the handouts if you want to reach out after the session to chat about anything you saw today. I'd love to hear from folks after these webinars. It's great to chat with you, and enjoy the rest of MAXDAYS. And I'll see maybe some of you again in about 15 minutes.